Hello everyone. If you're interested in ideas about teaching history, particularly thinking about how to combine STEM and history or the humanities, or if you're just interested in the transatlantic slave trade, I plan to look at a couple of ways that I teach the transatlantic slave trade in my class in this video. So one of the key things that I like to do to introduce students to this idea is to use art. Particularly this famous painting here by JMW Turner called Slavers is a painting that Turner created in the late 18th century, depicting events in the late 18th century of a slave voyage gone horribly awry. We can see a ship in the background and all this varied lighting, the sunlight, but dark and red, and in the foreground you can see bodies and fish devouring these bodies. This is a painting that is depicting an actual event that happened on board a slave ship called the Zong. Now, if you would like to get some more information about this painting and the historical background of the ship, the Khan Academy has a nice little 4-minute art history critique of Turner's painting that you can use in class or for your own interest to sort of get a case or an understanding of what actually went on this particular voyage. If you go to the Understanding Slavery Initiative website, there at this link here, you can simply just Google the Zong case study. You'll get further background, including textual records of the whole idea of slavery and what unfolded on the Zong. So one way to deal with the transatlantic slave voyages, which can be difficult for some people, is to introduce the art of abolitionism and the art of Turner, who is an abolitionist in Britain trying to use art to eliminate this capitalist industrial practice. The second thing that's interesting here, I think, that takes the art and blends it with STEM resources is that there's a database full of slave voyages that students or anybody can look up. It's called slavevoyages.org. Here's the URL. And it takes you to this web page, which has been updated I think a year and a half ago or so. And here you'll see that there's transatlantic, intra-American, African-American names, and then resources about this website. This website only used to be about transatlantic slave voyages of taking people from Africa to the New World across the Atlantic. But they've also added databases for intra-American slave voyages, just because the international transatlantic slave voyages were outlawed in the 19th century doesn't necessarily mean that intra-American slave voyages are outlawed. And also there's a database on African names if you that you can look for individuals, how they were recorded in history by the white slave traders. Names of individuals who were stolen from Africa. This database is also very interesting and helpful. But what I have my students, what I've been working on with my students is this transatlantic database. So you can understand the database. There's all kinds of information here that's helpful to help navigate and to learn how they came up with all this information. There's essays, there's maps, videos, estimates, but I wanted to show you something connecting Turner's work to this database by going to the database itself. I think there's 36,000 voyages here that David Eltis and others who work with him. Eltis is retired professor of history and of the transatlantic slave trade, but he spent much of his career coming up with this database. We can see here all kinds of different voyages, when they take place, how many arrived in port, what was the captain's names. And I think there's 36,000 voyages here, which is a lot to go through. But you can also filter the database to help you narrow things down. So if you know the itinerary of a ship, if you know the name of the captain, if you know, if you want to know about people, how many landed or whatever, you can filter this down to be more specific. Here, I think it's interesting because if we click on ship, nation, and owner, and click on voyage and vessels, if we know the vessel name, we can type this in, click on apply, and lo and behold, the database will come up with the very voyage that Turner was depicting in his artwork. So this artwork, of course, is Turner depicting an actual event that is in the Slave Voyages database. So here we get basic information. They principally purchased on this voyage slaves from the Gold Coast of Africa, and then slave landing the Black River. The year that arrived was slaves, 1781, and then 208 slaves arrived in port. And the captain's name was Luke Collingwood, and I think he's co-captain with Edward Howard. Now, if we click anywhere in this field here, in this row, it will give us a more in-depth description of the voyage. And I find this to be quite fascinating. To help us understand this artwork, we can get into some of the metadata of this database here, of this particular voyage. So it's assigned a voyage number, the name of the vessel is Zong. Here are the owners. The Gregson brothers are principal owners, and they are in business with several others. We know about the ship. It's actually a Dutch ship. The Zong comes from, is originally a Dutch ship, and it was taken by the English from the Dutch. 107 tons. We can get some information about the outcome of the voyage. It was completed as intended. It wasn't captured. They delivered slaves to the original owners. We even get the itinerary of the ship. It started in Liverpool in England, went to the Gold Coast, unspecified port, so they don't list in their records what port they went specifically, but along the Gold Coast of West Africa. They purchased at the Cape Coast Castle, and then they went and got another place of purchasing slaves from Anamambu, and then they went to the Black River, and then they went back to Liverpool after they sold their slaves on this voyage. So the voyage lasted 298 days in total, so that was nearly a year at sea for these crewmen, of which there was 113 days of the middle passage. So that means that slaves were on board the ship for 113 of the 298 days. They may have had to wait quite a while, depending on when they went at Cape Coast or Anamambu, to get the number of slaves that they needed to make the voyage profitable. They began their voyage March 5th, 1781, and departed Africa in September of 1781. They arrived with slaves. This is important, an interesting date, right? 3 days after Christmas. So 3 days after Christmas in 1781, they arrived with slaves to sell, and then they departed for home about 5 months later, and then they returned just 2 months after they left. Luke Collingwood is the captain, and he has a crew of 20, but we see here that 2 of those crew members died on the voyage. Now, what makes this voyage so horrific, although all of the voyages are horrific, but this one particularly so, is the numbers I'm about to show you next, which is slaves themselves, 440 got on the boat from Africa, but you can see here that 208 got off the boat or disembarked. And they all got off at the first port along the Black River. So if we scroll down here, we have also, they kept records, 232 slaves died during the Middle Passage, which is a mortality rate of 53%. And the information that I've just shown you has been collected from all of these different archives. All of this different information is where the makers of this database had to go to collect information and to verify all this information that you see here. 53% not only is a horrible number for the number of people that died, what that number also signifies is that this voyage was not profitable. That all the amount of money and wages and food that went into paying for the crew and for the investment in the ship and various other things that the company here, or the investors here, lost a lot of money in this voyage. And what becomes so controversial, particularly as you go to this website, Understanding the Slavery Initiative, and you read more about this voyage, is that even though the Gregson brothers seemingly didn't make a profit, they had actually taken out in insurance for losses at sea. So this is pretty standard for today. Shipping companies do this too. You shipping mail or packages, you know you're going to lose X amount on average. During this period, they knew that they would lose maybe about 10 to 15% of the people would die on board in transit. So you take out an insurance policy to cover your losses. And in this case, there was an insurance policy that covered for losses. It was debatable about whether slaves would be covered, however, and there's a big court case about this, because it looks as if Luke Collingwood or Edward Howard or somebody on board the ship, about a day or two away from their destination, I think along the Black River, they had discovered that there was an illness that had broken out amongst the crew. And so the managers, the slave managers, the slave traders, sadly made this decision to go down and to pick which ones were sick and to throw them overboard while they were still alive. Now, it's very, very galling, this story, because had they just waited another day or two, they would have made it to the port. I don't know, maybe some lives could have been saved. But what's so galling about this is that they, in essence, threw 232 people or thereabouts into the sea, knowing that they would die, so that they could then put an insurance claim on those losses at sea and make the voyage profitable. Now, this went into I think it had two big court cases, and of course JMW Turner is following all of this in the early 19th century. He makes this painting about this event in the late 18th century, and in essence tries to take artwork and show how evil and horrible slavery actually is. This, I think, is a way that you can mix STEM and art together to think about the transatlantic slave trade. Now, if you're interested in doing something more with this database, I have on my blog here at shannonbontrager.com, Teaching History and STEM of the Transatlantic Slave Trade. I've listed here, and you can go and look at this if you like, but I've listed here the assignment that I have my first year and second year college students do in terms of creating their own database to analyze the voyages. They have to get a sample of over 30 voyages, and then they have to compare them and do their own analytical and statistical analysis of the database. And I need to update this. It's a little bit off because I haven't quite updated it to include all of this new information of the intra-American or African-American names database, but primarily this only deals with the Transatlantic Database. And if you're interested in this, feel free to peruse this and use it or make your own adaptation to it. But I think it's a way that might be helpful for a lot of people thinking about, how do I teach the transatlantic slave trade? How can I mix STEM, database analysis, counting, statistical analysis, aggregates, that sort of thing? How can I mix this with the humanities and art history? And I found that this has been pretty successful, and the students often do a lot of good work with this project. So I thought I'd make this available and hopefully help you come up with a lesson or two to help during the semester. All right, that's it, and take care, and hope to see you soon.